gang, welcome to another episode of Larry Vickers Podcast, brought to you by my good friends at Firearms Trainers Association. This podcast is a little bit different. We're going to talk about Modelo Prison. That's Operation Acid Gambit. It was the rescue of Kurt Muse that kicked off the Operation Just Cause Panama invasion. If you guys follow any of my social media stuff, you'll notice that this particular weapon has been in a video I did not too long ago on my Vickers Tactical YouTube channel. This is the gun, also known as a Scud Hunter carbine. If you read Soldier Systems Daily, there was a write-up on this, and it's the same exact gun set up that I used on the rescue of Kurt Muse. So we'll go through some of the details on the gun. There was a book written by Kurt Muse, and he had the assistance of another writer, John Gilstrap, who is a fiction writer who helped him write this book. So it's historical-based fiction, basically a true book, but they had to change some names and whatnot based on Kurt's involvement with different government agencies and also the unit and whatnot. So they wanted to make it factual, but at the same time have some fiction deniability to it. Back in the day, when Panama went down, this is December 1989, right before Christmas, I was a pretty new guy in Delta Force, just went through selection, fall selection 1988, went through OTC, finished up OTC right after July 4th time frame, and went to A Squadron. And then somewhere along the line, I got wind that the other squadrons were working on a rescue mission. There was a CIA guy that had been scarfed up down in Panama. It was being held by Noriega. At that time, the tensions were high with Noriega. Kind of a carryover. George Bush had a hard-on for the guy. First George Bush had a real hard-on for the guy and was looking to take him down. Noriega had scarfed up an agency guy that we got word, didn't know who he was at the time, and it was holding him in as basically the primary state-run prison down there, Cárcel Modelo, in downtown Panama City, literally just a couple blocks from the Commandancia, which was essentially the Panamanian military Pentagon. So he's right down there in the lion's den, so to speak. And the unit had been given a mission, hey, start looking at the feasibility of rescuing this guy. If things kick off and we end up going into Panama to go in there and clean house and hunt Noriega down, we're going to have to go get this guy because there's already threats against his life. Not only do they have him apprehended and they had him in prison, but they had told him, hey, if there's ever a rescue attempt, we're gonna kill you immediately. So got wind of that. Remember, I was a new guy, just came across the hall, just made it through OTC and went to A Squadron after July 4th time frame in 1989. So I was brand new. Went to A2 troop, F team. I was an assaulter, junior assaulter on the team, and I got rumblings of this, mission, but I didn't give it much thought. I didn't really think about anything coming our way and whatnot. As time went on and we started to rehearse for a variety of things, and we did rehearsals for the Panama invasion and all that kind of stuff, that mission set came to A Squadron, came to the squadron I was in, and also came to the troop I was in. So we were on the mission. We're getting ready to rehearse for the mission. And the whole piece was how to get in there and get out and do it and do it in such a fashion where we didn't take a lot of casualties. Because at the end of the day, he's in a prison. So we had to break into a prison in order to break him out. And what was the best way to do that? Turned out going through the roof was the best way to do it. We didn't have a lot of good intel on how to get through the roof. As a matter of fact, we expected the worst. We expected that the roof access, that the cupola at the roof coming down was going to be heavily fortified. So we went P for plenty on the explosive charges. And as it turned out, it was a very lightly, we could have probably just almost kicked it in or knocked it in with a bolt cutter, but or a sledgehammer. We didn't know that, so we went in with a charge that was P for plenty. And when it went off, you knew it. But fast forward there a little bit. I remember talking on the phone to my buddy Ken Hackathorn. We'd been doing a number of rehearsals and everything. It kind of looked like things were gearing up, but nobody really knew where things were going to go. And then I believe it was a Sunday night. I was at home watching some TV, and then the news came out that a military officer, I think a Marine Corps lieutenant, if memory serves me correct, was shot outside of the commandancy and killed. And I went, oh, I remember being on the phone with Ken at the time, and I remember, man, I think this is going to be it. I don't think, and sure enough, my beeper went off, and it was game time. Ken was on the other end of the phone. I said, dude, I got to go. Hung up and went into the unit, and we were getting our stuff, finalized and ready to go. And the squadron commander, Eldon Bargewell, Lieutenant Colonel Eldon Bargewell, who recently passed away, outstanding officer, outstanding leader, said, hey, we're Panama, at the time it's called Blue Spoon. Blue Spoon's going to go down, and we're in a couple nights, we're going to go in and get Kurt Muse out. And I remember my head was spinning. I was like, just an hour or so before, I'm at home watching Sunday night football or whatever I was doing on the phone to my buddy. And then now, a couple hours later, I run into my squadron commander's filling canteens and getting his backpack, he's getting his rucksack ready, and said in a couple nights, it's game time. So fast forward, we loaded up and headed down, and we went to Howard Air Force Base in Panama and kind of staged out of the hangar down there. And then as time went on, more and more people came in. All JSOC ended up in there, which was a bit of a problem for everybody to be that centrally located. But we did some more rehearsals, went through things and whatnot, and then sure enough, kicked it all off at just before 1 a.m., on the night of December 20th. The plan was to do it 45 minutes prior. We ended up doing it 15 minutes prior. Things had to be slid because remember, there's a lot of moving parts. You got a lot of aviation assets. You got Rangers that are jumping in. You got all kinds of stuff going on. Our mission was going to kick it all off, but how soon it kicked it all off and making sure all the other moving parts were in action, in motion, was critical. Rolled in, and then just as we were landing on top of the helo, AC-130 gunship started lighting up the commandancia, which was a pretty cool show, I gotta admit. Watching them hammering the vehicles and stuff in the parking lot of the commandancia, and then it started a fire, which spread kind of to an area where a lot of shacks were, shanties and whatnot, and caught all that on fire. All that stuff burned down. And that was a direct byproduct of the AC-130 Spectre gunship firing up the cars in the commandancia parking lot. And that fire spreading and then going down to this essentially shanty town by the water and burned it all down. While that was going on, great distractor, I might add, we rolled into the prison, landed, breached the top. The guys who were security forces on the outside, on the upper edges, the snipers and whatnot, guys had sniper rifles, had M203s, had belt-fed machine guns and whatnot. They started lighting up the guard towers, and the reaction force that was basically not only in the guard towers, but was on the ground floor area of the prison. They had gotten word we were going to come in. If we were going to come in to rescue Muse, we were going to come through the ground floor. So they'd kind of fortified that area down below. And they were wrong. They didn't, I don't think in 100 years they thought we would come through the top. And so we had the benefit of the high ground, and the guys started lighting them up. We made entry, went down. The good news is there had been an American doctor who had been dispatched from the embassy, who had been making regular visits to Kurt Muse to check on his welfare, and he was able to give us intel back on where Muse was at and the layout, what he could see, layout of the prison, the stairs, whatnot, and kind of the general layout, and also his location. So we were able to go down 2 flights of stairs and go right to where Muse was at. We didn't have to worry about going in and finding him and start searching cell to cell or whatever if he'd been moved. We had good intel on where he was at. And that was a direct byproduct of the fact that they had been able to leverage, the embassy had been able to leverage to get a doctor in there to check on his well-being. Then we got great intel from this guy. Fantastic intelligence. Made your entry, went down in, put an explosive charge on the door, blew open the door. Caddy corner across the hall was where we called the interrogator's cell or whatnot. But it was a guy who'd been there essentially as a guard, had been told, he is the guy who told Muse, if there's a rescue attempt, the first thing I'm gonna do is come over here and kill you. So Muse heard things going on outside, heard some machine gun fire, AC-130s hammering the commandancia, So he knew, ooh, this is game time. So he was hiding in his bathroom area. I think he had a little stick of some kind or something he was going to try to attack the interrogator or the guard from. And then when a couple of Delta operators called him out and said, hey, you need to hide in your bathroom, we're going to blow the door. They blew the door. He came out. They had went across the hall. Same team had went across the hall. I was hallway security at the time, and myself and other guys. They'd went across the hall and found the dude, the guard, and whacked him, dunced him. Came back across, put body armor, put a Protect helmet on, Muse, came out and getting ready to exfil. And you see the title, 6 Minutes to Freedom. That's from when we touched down to when they called for exfil, that we had him secure, PC Precious Cargo secure. From when we touched down to when we were ready to exfil was 6 minutes. The 6 minutes was just the amount of time it took. It wasn't like that was the amount of time we had allocated. If we could have done it quicker, we would have done it quicker, just the way it shook out. 6 minutes of freedom from touchdown to when we were ready to exfil him. Couple things I remember is fire. Coming in on the helos and looking around, there was fire. Buildings were on fire. Stuff was on fire from gunships and whatnot. And I remember going, wow, that struck me, because all the rehearsals we'd done live fire rehearsals, a bunch of them, nothing was ever on fire, right? So there's something about me going, oh wow, this is the real deal, because stuff's on fire, which is kind of bizarre. You think about that at the time, but we had done live fire and there was explosions and guys shooting live ammo and all that kind of stuff had went on, but nothing had been on fire, nothing had been burning. And once I realized that, that's when I realized, you know what, this is the real deal. The other thing I remember is we were coming out. I'll never forget this. Coming out, we were on the stairs. We're waiting on the helos to come back in to exfil, to leave. And it got quiet for a second. AC-130 had let up from hammering the commandancia. It'd gotten a little bit quiet, and you could hear the prisoner screaming inside the prison, because we're up on the 3rd floor now, and you could hear them 2 floors below, and they had that scream, and when you've heard it, if you ever hear it for real, you'll never mistake it. The genuine scream of somebody scared for their life. Most of the screams you hear, movies and whatnot, I mean, you can tell it's a fake scream, an actor's doing it, but when you hear the scream of somebody that's scared for their life, it sticks with you. You'll never mistake it for anything else. And I remember there was a little pregnant pause there. The AC-130 had let up, hammering the commandancia. And Kurt Muse he didn't have on ear pros, he didn't have on anything. And every explosion, he was trying to melt into the stairs. He was obviously, as you can imagine, he was scared, understandably so. But you could hear the screaming down below. And I'll never forget that. Came out, birds landed. One of the lessons learned is we probably should have used Blackhawks to go out. Little birds were great. There's a little bird depicted on the cover here. Little birds are great for going in, but when somebody knows you're there, they're not the greatest thing to get out with. They can't sustain much damage. They're a good stealth below the radar aircraft. As we were going in, I mean, at night in the dark, they're almost impossible to see. But once they know where you're at, you're on top of this roof, and they know to shoot in that general direction, I don't know that little birds are the best choice. Probably should have taken something in that's a little bit more combat worthy, can sustain more damage, and probably should have been Blackhawks. Lesson learned. Birds came in, I jumped on bird 2, Kurt Muse got on bird 1, and as soon as they lifted off, I could just tell they had slipped down over the edge and then flew across this graveyard, and just kind of something didn't seem right. I'm not sure if they took battle damage, they took gunshots, and they were losing power or whatever it was, but they ended up having to set down on the far side of the graveyard. I didn't know that, because once they lifted up and slipped off, they basically went into the darkness and I lost them. Plus there was also a guy shooting at me down below from the graveyard, which needless to say had my attention, and I had to give him some rounds back in his direction to keep his head down. But the bird kind of disappeared on me. Little did I know that it actually went down. It went down and landed on the other side of the graveyard. Guys deployed, Delta assaulters deployed, and then they got back on. Not all of them hooked back up with their safety line. So they came down and then turned the corner and they started to lift off, and then they got shot again. A guy came out on a balcony, I believe, and lit them up, and then they crash landed. One of the skids collapsed. One of the Delta operators lost part of his foot because it was underneath the skid. Things went sideways, and this was the bird that Muse was on. We didn't know that. I was on bird 2, bird 3 and 4 coming behind. We went and we landed back at Howard Air Force Base. They hauled out one of the pilots. One of the birds was stripped down to bare minimum gear, lightweight. Like a couple birds had one pilot, a couple birds had 2. One of the birds that had 2 pilots, the guy got wounded. Thank God it had 2 pilots, but he got wounded. He had to be hauled out on a stretcher, and then they came by. I remember my team leader came by and he said, "You got ammo? Are you good?" I go, "Yeah." "What do you?" Because bird 1 went down. We're going to have to go back into the city and get it. And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" I couldn't believe it. I mean, here we'd won. It's like, I mean, case in point, it's like when the Seahawks threw the interception of the Super Bowl right on the goal line. And that's the way I looked at it. Was here we are, we just won the Super Bowl, and at the last minute, we fumbled the ball. Unbeknownst to us, everybody was okay, albeit injured. A couple of the Delta operators were in dire straits, but we had contingency planned. We'd planned on all this, and there was ground forces coming in with Delta operators amongst the ground forces. We had APC, armored personnel carriers, that were coming in, flowing around the prison, flowing around that whole area, and they came up in, they got vectored in by Eldon Bargewell, squadron commander, vectored them in and called them into where the Little Bird went down. And sure enough, got there in time, was able to get Kurt Muse out of there, was able to get everybody out of there, was able to treat the Delta operators who were wounded. Nobody died, and it's all because we'd had that planning in place with the contingency forces in place with the armored personnel carriers and the Delta operators and Delta medics on board to go in there and make it happen. So that basically saved the day. If it wasn't for that, at least 1 or 2 of the Delta operators probably would have died. But all's well that ends well. They went up on top of a landing site, a helo extraction site, and got Kurt Muse out of there, and in no time he was back home reunited with his family. So I remember walking in, the very first thing we came in, and Eldon Bargewell came and thanked everybody for what they did. He came right up to me, shook my hand, and told everybody how great of a job they did, was giving everybody a status report on what had happened with Kurt Muse and the fact that we did get him and he was safe, and the other guys were safe and everybody was recovering. And then General Steiner, I believe, was JSOC commander. He might have been SOCOM commander at the time. Actually, he was SOCOM commander, came in and told us, he said, "I'm not even going to start with a war." This is the next day. "I'm not even going to start with any kind of a war story and telling you, because what you just did is so far beyond anything I ever did. I'm not even going to go there." But that definitely, like I said, my life is breaking into 2 halves. What before December 20th, 1989, before Modelo Prison, and then what happened after Modelo Prison. You want to read more about it, I recommend the book. I think the book's out of print, but if you dig around, you can probably find it. 6 Minutes to Freedom. Well worth the read. Like I said, it's historical fiction. It's written, basically it's historically correct, but it is written as a fiction book in order to protect some of the people involved. Some of the people involved are still in government service, whether it be on the civilian side or military side, but some of them are in government service still, so they want to protect their interests. Also, there's a video I have on my YouTube channel. It's probably elsewhere on YouTube as well, but it's called Combat Zone Rescue in Panama. But if you go to the Vickers Tactical YouTube channel, it's a documentary that was done several years ago where they interviewed me and Kurt Muse, and they interviewed several people that were involved with the mission. I think it might even been during the 20th anniversary of the mission. But it's pretty good. It's not bad. They did the best they could with the budget, but it tells the story very well, and overall, it's well worth watching. So it's Combat Zone Rescue in Panama, and it's on the Vickers Tactical YouTube channel. All right, it's time to take a break. I'm going to take you through the Colt Model 723 here. I did my YouTube video on it, and I'm going to take you through this thing and kind of go through some of the bits and pieces of what makes this gun so special. Hey, a little tip for you brought to you by my good friends at CCW Safe, Home Defense Carbine. How I set mine up, first and foremost, Obviously, you need good components. This is my BCM training gun, which I also use as a home defense carbine. In my opinion, the most important accessory put on it is a red dot sight. I use and recommend aim point. To me, if you're going to bet your life on a red dot sight, it needs to be an aim point. So right off the bat, good red dot sight, aim point is my choice. Second to that, you could argue white light or sling. You can make an argument either way. What's next down the list? I use a Surefire X300. I've used it for years. They have a variety of them on the market now. Generally, Surefire is the go-to for this. There's other good lights out there, but as a general rule, when I grab a white light, it's a Surefire. Sling, my signature sling from Blue Force Gear. All right. Used it for a year. Many thousands are in service around the globe with law enforcement, military, and civilians. Fantastic company. Magazine I have in this, there's many mags on the market that work great. I've been using the Tango Down Arc 2 mag with great results. Scalar works, iron sights. This is a great home defense carbine setup. My personal training gun and home defense gun. BCM, aim point, Surefire, Blue Force Gear, Tango Down, Scalar works. Can't go wrong. Remember, this is very possibly a gun that may have to save your life and the lives of your loved ones. So if you cheap Charlie it, you're betting your life on something that may not get the job done when you need it to. Have a good one. LAV out. All right, gang, it's time to take you through the Colt Model 723 as I used in Delta. Had this gun from when I got in the unit. It was brand new when I first got it. It was stock. There was no, this is my clone. This is a post-sample Colt Model 723, which we use the generic term Car 15, by the way. It was brand new when I got it. I even had the little cardboard wick down the barrel. It was a brand new gun, straight from Colt. Not U.S. property marked. So it's essentially an export marked M16A2 carbine. All right, and catalog number Colt Model 723. When I got this, the first thing we did was basic rifle marksmanship and OTC using National Match modified M14. So I was used a very accurate gun, excellent trigger and whatnot. Got this thing right off the bat. I was like, the triggers, was real crunchy. It just wasn't overly impressive. The good example of sometimes first impressions aren't lasting impressions. That's an outstanding rifle. I only ever remember having one malfunction with it. I had a malfunction with it when it was new in OTC. I never had a malfunction with the gun the entire rest of the time I had it. I broke a bolt from a lot of rounds being shot through it and got a new bolt, but I never had this thing lay down for me in any way, shape, or form. Super reliable gun. The Colts of this era were outstanding rifles. And as a matter of fact, the M4 carbine as you know it today, really the lineage of it and the reputation it has started with this era gun. Because Delta was the ones back in the day that were starting to use this in lieu of the MP5. When I got to the unit in OTC, we largely used MP5s for CQB purposes. When I got across the hall to A Squadron, we barely ever touched MP5s. We were using Car 15s like this. It was also my first introduction to aim point. This is an aim point 2000. Up to that we were using iron sights. There were still some guys using iron sights. This was basically a commercial hunting red dot sight that guys were using for military purposes. After you use one for a while, you realize, oh my God, that red dot sight, the advantage it is for practical is off the chart. And to be honest with you, for a hunting optic, it's pretty damn good optics. Rugged, reliable. One of the issues that we had with the Aimpoint 2000 is these little plastic caps for elevation and windage. If you lose those now you've exposed yourself to getting fog and moisture and whatnot inside the tube, and it can eventually fog the tube. Aimpoint has long since fixed all that. Remember, this thing here was 1980s, right? The stuff they're building today is alien technology compared to this. Now you don't have to have the caps to keep it it's watertight whether there's caps on it or not. Delta's use of the aim point and seeing aim points being used by Delta members protecting General Schwarzkopf during Desert Storm, kind of started Aim Point down the military LE path that they continue to, excel at even today. But it started back in the day with the unit using, who had Aim Point, earlier Aim Points, but really the Aim Point 2000 you see here was the primary Aim Point that guys were using. All right, battery pack on the side, rheostat to turn it on and off, elevation and windage, 1-inch tube. Honestly, damn good red dot sight in a lot of ways. I would take this over almost anything else on the market right now, with the exception, of course, the current present day Aim Point products, which are fantastic red dot sights. So that's where this started. Yeah, we had a carrying handle mount set up, which basically sets you up for a chin weld to get the proper, eye relief on it. You had to set up not a cheek weld so much like you can now with an M4 or other rifles, but a chin weld. So you got used to when you bring the gun up, you index your chin, and there is the red dot sight. So right here on the chin versus the cheek. You get used to it. It kind of seems foreign now and kind of bizarre compared to what we've been using for years, but back in the day, it was perfectly usable. Guys were used to it. Some guys would even have cheek pieces back here. I never did because I didn't want to interfere with the charging handle, because some of the cheek pieces of back in the day would have a clearance for the charging handle, but only to a degree. If you had it collapsed, you wouldn't be able to cycle the charging handle. So I never went that route. I learned to use a chin weld and just dealt with it. Battery life wasn't bad, was pretty decent for what it was. The real issue was with these Aim Points was you had to have the caps on them, or eventually you would get moisture inside the tube. Like I said, they've long since fixed that. Now, 2-position sliding buttstock. This is the plastic one that Colt used during that era. Notice the wobble, which was common back then, very common. Now it's kind of alien to see that. Pretty much everybody's remedied that. All the different manufacturers, whether it's BCM or Magpul or HK or whoever, they've pretty much all remedied that wobble. Either it fits tighter to the tube, or it has a locking mechanism or a mechanism that takes the slack out. And once again, this is something that you get used to. It's not ideal. Obviously, we're a lot farther down the road when it comes to retractable buttstocks. This has a 2-position tube, which was what the norm was back in this era of Car 15. Was all the way in or all the way out. There was no intermediate positions. So what we would do is have it all the way in or all the way out. We would find the sweet spot somewhere in the middle. For me, it was about 1/3 of the way in. And that was the spot we used when we had body armor on for CQB purposes. And when you found that sweet spot, you'd mark it, take it to the arms room, and then they would mill another recess so you could lock the latch in that sweet spot position. It's interesting. When I first got the first 4 position, I realized right off the bat it wasn't the same. Because they're evenly spread, all the way in, all the way out, and then 2 positions in between that are evenly spread, and it wasn't the same as that sweet spot position, which was about 1/3 of the way in. Minor thing, but once you've shot a gun so much and trained with it so much, it becomes second nature, and you pick right up on that. Hey, the length of pull's a little bit different. After a while, you get used to it, and it's no big deal, but I picked right up on that. That the positions that they had chose, the 4 evenly spaced positions, were not the same as my 1/3 of the way in sweet spot position. I shoot a long gun left-handed. I'm left eye dominant, right-handed shooter, so I shoot a pistol right-handed, but I shoot a long gun left-handed. So I learned to run the selector and everything, and still to this day, I run the selector with my trigger finger. There's some guys that do this. I don't. My thing is use your trigger finger and learn to run it this way. I run the bolt release here. I'll come over and do the charging handle like this, and in the mag release, I'll use my thumb and hit the magazine release here. And that's how I run the gun. And I don't set my guns up with ambi controls because of that. So that's why you don't see anything ambi on the gun. There was some ambi stuff available at that time, some ambi charging handles and whatnot. Certainly ambi selector switches, but I never used them, and I still don't to this day. If a gun has that, it's because that's the way I got it. Like the new HK MR223A3, which is largely an ambi gun. That's just the way it came. It's not the way I set it up. All right, moving forward, this is before Picatinny rail systems or the Knights Armament rail system or anything along those lines. And what we did was we took flashlights. In this case, this is a flashlight called the QXL dive light. It was blue. So the arms room You painted it black, and they also used rubber inner tube, black rubber inner tube, and then they used hose clamps, and they hose clamped it to the bottom handguard. And then you would have the arms room, the commo guys. The commo guys would run a switch so where you could put your tape switch wherever you wanted. This was a surefire lens cover. And as you see, you got to be real careful because they're real easy to flop open when you don't want them. And then when you hit that, you accidentally bump on and activate the light. So this was something a lot of guys would rubber band close. They would have a rubber band or a secondary way to close it and to keep it closed. But it was an IR cover, so you could have an IR light. Overall, not a bad piece of kit. By the way, you can see, look right here, you can see the blue. If you look in the back, you can see the blue original cover of the QXL dive light. This was a barrel, 14.5-inch barrel. There were other guys who had pencil barrels, the thinner profile barrel. 1-in-7 twist. This is kind of the M203 cut prior to the M4. Most people associate this barrel with the M4 carbine. Actually, the barrel predated the M4. Is most famous on the M4 because of this M203 cut right here, but it predated the M4. That's the way mine was issued. And like I said, there were other guys that had basically the identical gun, but with a pencil barrel, an A1 profile pencil barrel. Over here on this side, interesting upper receiver, kind of a transitional upper, A1 style rear sight, but you had the triangle brass deflector. This is something you kind of saw with the A2, but it doesn't have the A2 rear sight. This is a classic Colt Model 723, and it's the way our CAR-15s in the unit were set up, just like that. Originally, back in the day, I saw the arms room do for a guy. They chopped this off, left the rear sight in place, and then they put a little piece of Weaver or Picatinny rail here, and a guy mounted the optic directly to the top of the Weaver or Picatinny rail, right in front of the chopped rear sight. Pretty slick. I was talking to Justin here, it'd be kind of neat to do that now because it's kind of a cool, slick retro touch. The problem is these uppers are kind of hard to find, kind of collector's items, so it's kind of you have to bite your tongue to chop a collectible, desirable, somewhat rare upper to do that kind of a retro touch. But it was a pretty cool setup. I saw that in arms room. It was pretty neat. Now, double mag clamp. This is a homemade one. This has cardboard in the middle, and then I took duct tape, we also called it 100-mile-an-hour tape, and then basically made this as you see it and pinched it to the bottom so you could put it in place and you would be able to clear the ejection port cover. It would lay all the way flat. It wouldn't have to lay on the next magazine. Why is it homemade? I'll tell you why. We tried the metal clamps. Not only did they're heavier than they needed to be, they were steel, they also rusted. But the real problem with the metal clamps is they would transmit the vibration from one magazine when the gun was firing, and then the vibration would come across the clamp, go up to the top, and then the top round on the other magazine would drift forward. And now you'd have a round protruding out like this. So when you went to do your reload, you had to deal with that. You either had to flip that round off, you had to deal with it in some form or fashion because here's this round that's sticking out like a 1/4 inch or whatever out of the front of the mag. That's a direct byproduct of the steel clamps and the vibration that transmitted between from one magazine through the clamp to the other magazine. So I just made the homemade mag clamp. Cardboard, and then kind of did a little bit of a Z fold on the cardboard, and then did a 100-mile-an-hour tape routine, and then the cardboard tape setup would mitigate a lot of the vibration so I didn't have to worry about the rounds drifting forward. Pretty slick setup. Honestly, once you use it, there's no good mag pouch to put it in, so you got to kind of put it in a cargo pocket. But if you wanted to set something up for home defense and have 2 magazines ready to go, this is still today what I would grab right here. There's my Colt Model 723. Excellent rifle. Served me very well. Used it in Panama during Just Cause. Also used basically the same rifle during Desert Storm hunting for scuds, which in and of itself was kind of a joke because here we could see guys 5, 6, 7, 800, 1,000 meters away and we're shooting at them with a 200-meter gun. So that's where a 7.62 battle rifle would have been a real plus. But very fond memories of this gun, and my passion for the M4 carbine and the AR family and for aim point started with this gun. It all started with this gun. Hope you enjoyed it. little Modelo prison overview. Talked a little bit about my recollection and some of my thoughts on a little bit look in the past for the mission and also the book. Remember to check out the Combat Zone Rescue in Panama video on my YouTube channel, the Vickers Tactical YouTube channel, and also check out my YouTube video on the Modelo Prison Car 15. Have a good one. LAV out.